Welcome back to another Miraculous Ladybug review. By this channel's standards, the last Miraculous review did rather well. Since this is another Chinese-based episode, let's dig in! We open with Sabine doing some Chinese things, like checking the calendar, looking at a horoscope, feng shui. I do remember having these calendars growing up, but there were always two numbers on them, one for the Gregorian calendar and the other for the Chinese lunar calendar. After checking the calendar, we are treated to more housework scenes. I think I hear a reflection from Mulan during some of these scenes of Sabine doing housework, huh? After some scenes of feng shui and making tea, she gets some scenes of Tai Chi, which annoys me to no end because the animation does not look right. There's something off about it that I can't put my finger on, but it just doesn't look right. So after Marinette klutzes down the stairs and starts making breakfast, I seriously can't understand how Sabine hasn't figured out the whole superhero secret identity thing. A Santa monster appears, and Marinette takes off. And apparently Sabine teaches a Chinese painting class, which I need to question why she doesn't teach her daughter any of this, not just the painting, but the language and the culture. In the Shanghai special, she went to China, she being Marinette, not Sabine, to follow Adrian, and not her roots or her uncle. It gets a bit grating because the show's Chinese representation feels very surface level. This franchise is also no stranger to whitewashing accusations, as early footage made Marinette appear far more Asian than the final product. During the Shanghai special's previews and concept art, Renren's hair was blonde. This was changed in the actual special. In the special, it was changed to crimson, so it made it seem that they weren't whitewashing an Asian character with Caucasian features. But back to this episode, we get to the impetus of Sabine's akumatization, the bus. After she removes a jerk in a suit who was trying to take up the space of a handicapped man in a wheelchair, Marinette actually got off the bus to go flower shopping and ends up missing the bus. Marinette was also the last one holding the tickets, so whoops. And the ticket inspection guy comes along and decides to be as unpleasant as possible. Then he gives her a ticket for not having tickets. When Sabine can't pay because Marinette has her wallet, the ticket inspector says, "Good Parisians pay for their tickets, and we're gonna arrest you." And naturally, no one vouches for her, not even the guy in the wheelchair she helped earlier, or the bus driver. But bystander effects, bystander effects. So naturally, Roger gets to be a huge idiot. Those of you who say this is a PSA on racial profiling and can see it a mile away, you can probably guess the story beats. Sabine's annoyance is seen as an escalation of a conflict. Reaching for the phone is considered reaching for a weapon. Destruction of property by the police, overkill with a SWAT team. Hey Roger, you know Sabine. It was brought up in this very episode. You know what else was brought up in this very episode? Your daughter Sabrina is in Marinette's class. I also need to address the elephant in the room. This episode aired in 2022. This episode is actually the first chronological appearance of Qilin. If you were watching this as it aired, Dearest Family came first, and that was her actual debut. Clearly, the production order is a bit wonky. Assuming these were both meant to air in 2021 and were produced 1 year in advance, what exactly was the world dealing with? I don't even need to name it. You know what it is. So, let's get this out of the way. A French newspaper played up the yellow peril angle with the yellow alert. French agents clapped back saying, "I'm not a virus." Anti-Asian hysteria. Naturally, the ability to tell Asian people apart is lost to bigots, so they target other minorities who happen to be from the same region of the world. And this was a time when Asian people around the world felt like authority was utterly absent in the face of their harassment, vandalism, and assault. There was even a recall election for former District Attorney of San Francisco because of the criminal justice system's utter absence in dealing with the wave of anti-Asian hate crimes. We really should be asking the question of whether abuse of authority should be the main moral of the episode rather than its laxity, especially in light of recent events. It would have been much more relevant if Sabine had been a victim of racial abuse and law enforcement had been completely lax about it, which makes her angry enough to want justice outside the law, but that's not what happens. This is a PSA about racial profiling and abuse from law enforcement. I am not a fan of Qilin's design. It's like someone just googled Chinese armor and just modified it with green and gold. Though I do like the helmet, which does evoke the Qilin rather well. I'm also happy they went with the Mandarin pronunciation rather than just Qilin in English, though I grew up hearing Qilin and Qilin because Cantonese and Vietnamese were spoken in my house. And I am sure I mispronounced them both because my brain is in English mode and not any of those modes. Now, this is the part where I yell about inaccuracies. Qilin are associated with good fortune. If one appears to you, good. Your family line will bear a lot of sons and bring a lot of prestige. I think that's a legend about Confucius or Lao Tzu, but I'm not too sure about that. Looks like Gabriel has a sense of humor because this is a creature meant for good luck and not, bad luck. And of course, Sabine being Chinese, she has to speak in cones and aphorisms in order to make a point. Move the mountains. Climb the lightning bolt. Hang from the clouds. I half expect her to start ranting about honor in 5 seconds. The only time I think she says something that you don't get out of a fortune cookie or the standard "get these handcuffs off me" is integrity without intelligence is blind ignorance. Yeah, that ignorance part is what annoys me so much, because this whole episode frames racism, which is the PSA we're going for, as just ignorance. It never actually says racism. Unlike most villains in the show, Sabine breaks akumatization by rejecting the power. Ladybug, with the help of Cat Noir, had swiped the keys from Roger, who was adamant about not freeing Qilin. Qilin just wanted the handcuffs off, and Ladybug obliged. Qilin is not willing to go back on her own word. So Marinette takes the blame for the whole bus ticket thing. And the episode ends right there. So even after escalating the situation far beyond what it should be, Marinette gets the blame and Sabine ends up having to pay for the ticket. Okay, it's not like Roger or the ticket inspector were useful in this episode either. For starters, the definition of insanity. They fought a supervillain by throwing more people, vans, and helicopters at her. And tried to expect different results even though she effortlessly blasted them all away. They gained absolutely nothing, and of course, even after all their failures, they are more than content to fight Ladybug and Cat Noir. I don't mean argue, I mean actually fight. They were more than willing to ignore superheroes. The lead superheroes in all of Paris, mind you, who specialize in stopping these kinds of attacks. Because they were too unwilling to admit that bus tickets were not worth it. And we don't even get to see any of them tossed in sewer water. In terms of the moral of the story, it is executed poorly. For an episode dealing with racial profiling, it doesn't say racism and it doesn't say profiling. The most explicit it gets is one line of dialogue that says, "Other Parisians pay for their tickets." I'm just saying the racial profiling would have been much more evident if all the white people got off the bus and then Sabine was the only one stopped for random inspection. The ticket inspector really couldn't say he thinks of Sabine as a foreigner rather than a French citizen. No line about the embassy or asking for a passport rather than a general ID. Perpetual foreigner is the simplest form of anti-Asian racism out there, and the show couldn't even get that down. There's also the inherent exaggeration within entertainment itself. A mean girl in real life is more likely to talk behind your back rather than hatch up an elaborate scheme with ropes and hostile takeover of movies and gorillas like what Chloe does in the show. It's easier to interpret Roger and the ticket inspector's levels of bigotry not as bigotry, but as cartoonish buffoonery and villainy rather than actual real life bigotry that affects real people. The animation in this episode is subpar at best. That is as nice as I can get. It is pretty bad. The moral of the story was a bungled mess. We have two bumbling karma Houdinis, and I'm Cyril, and I'm signing off right here because I don't want to watch this anymore. The more that I think about this, the stupider it gets. Goodbye!